All right, so a pleasant good morning, everyone, and welcome to this today's Zoom session. And what we'll be looking at is the reproductive system. As the French say, the raison d'être, the reason why we are here, right? The main reason is just to reproduce. So therefore, examination of the reproductive system is indeed important. Why is it important that we as a species reproduce? Well, if we did not reproduce, we would disappear. We would become extinct. Hence the importance of the reproductive system as compared to all the other 11 organ systems within well, the other 10 organ systems, yes, they are indeed important. But the reproductive, perhaps singularly, has the most important role to play because it keeps us here. So when we look at the reproductive system, let's first start with the male anatomy. Here we see the sagittal section. It illustrates the organs of the male reproductive system, and the structures are numbered in the organ in which they encounter sperm. So of course, the sperm made in the testes, it then goes through the epididymis to the ductus deferens, is going through by the ductus deferens. You see it's coming along, comes around to this part, passes through, and well, this is the prostate here, in light blue, so it passes through the prostate. And here we see, of course, this is the bladder. So one of the important things, you could have the bladder and the sperm, they do share the same urethral passage out in terms of exiting the body itself. So from the, as it passes through the prostate, it goes along via the membranous urethra, as shown here. This is the prostatic urethra, so called because it is within the confines of the prostate, shown here in light blue. As it exits the prostatic urethra, it's now in the membranous urethra. The membranous is just the area external to the prostate. And then, of course, it comes down here to the spongy urethra within the penis itself. And of course, ejaculation leads to the expulsion of the semen. Important to note, it's called semen because not only is it sperm, but it's sperm together with contents from the different ducts. So the penis, let's have a look at the penis itself. Penis consists, the shaft and glands of the penis, they project outward from the lower torso, but the root remains within the pelvic cavity itself. So this is the root, it is within the pelvic cavity. A ventral view of the erect penis with the corpus spongiosum display. So it's just showing this view here. And if I were to ask a question, does the foreskin of an uncircumcised penis, does it cover the gland or the shaft of the penis?
The gland?
Yeah, so the foreskin of an uncircumcised penis will cover the gland itself. It does not cover the shaft of the penis. So here it is. This is just showing the different areas. And important to note, in terms of the penis going from it flaccid to the erect state, the erect penis is it moves to that state because of the fact that it's filled with blood. Now, the reason why I wanted just to make mention of that is that persons with heart conditions, they usually have to be a bit watchful in terms of engaging in sexual intercourse because of the fact that it raises their blood pressure, and it, depending on the complaint associated with the heart itself, yeah, it could lead, it could in extreme cases cause death. So that is why persons who do have heart conditions, they have to follow the advice of the doctor, use particular medication to control their blood pressure such that, they continue in the land of the living. So let's have another look here. So the testes. Now the testes themselves, they dangle in the scrotum away from the body. Now, why is it that the testes are, they're located away from the body? They're dangling in the scrotum. One word beginning with T.
Temperature.
Yeah, temperature, right? So temperature, that is very important. And what is it specific about the temperature? Which temperature favors sperm production? Low temperatures or high temperatures? Lower temperatures. So somebody, let's say, who has a male who's having issues, low sperm count, let's say he and his female partner, they want to, they go to a fertility clinic. Yes, they want to have a child. Which one is better for him in terms of encouraging sperm growth? Wearing boxers or briefs? Which one would encourage or assist in sperm manufacture? Wearing boxers, boxers are loose, or briefs, which hold the penis and the scrotum closer to the body. Which one would be better?
The boxers.
Yeah, boxers, right? Boxers, they're loose, as the name implies, and it allows circulation of air, so that will keep the temperature of the scrotum down, and by extension, the testes as well. And this, of course, favors the production of sperm. The sperm themselves, they develop in the seminiferous tubules. So they're shown here. This is where they actually developed, and as shown in the cross section. And if you were to watch a scanning electron micrograph, which you would see of the seminiferous tubule, it shows spermatogonia at the tubule periphery. And the mature sperm, which is the next slide, we'll just see that. And the sperm with the tail projecting into the lower lumen. And so if we were to just look at the next slide, so these are the tails of the sperm projecting into the lumen, and this is the seminiferous tubule shown here. Now, when we're thinking of the testes themselves, the steroid-producing cells of the testes, they are known as the Leydig cell. And these testes, they have two major functions. What are the two major functions of the testes?
So to create sperm.
Right, spermatogenesis, very good.
And to store it as well.
Store it, yes. And it also to produce a hormone. What hormone is produced in the testes? And it's produced by the Leydig cell. There you go, testosterone. Pardon? Yeah, so both testosterone formation or production and spermatogenesis, which is production of sperm, these are facilitated by the testes. So yes, storage occurs. That's one of the minor functions of the testes, but the major ones, do take note of those two, is or are the spermatogenesis, or the manufacture of the sperm themselves, and the testosterone formation. So spermatogenesis, this whole concept of the formation of the sperm, what happens there? Well, this is just showing the process as it relates to spermatogenesis. And here we have the spermatogonium with 46, right? The two spermatogonia. And first of all, mitosis produces two identical cells, right, as shown here. Then the DNA, so from the cells, you have the DNA replicates in one daughter cell, which is the primary spermatocyte, shown here. Then you have from here, you have meiosis 1 and meiosis 2, forming the haploid nucleus, which is then encased in the head of the sperm. When you're thinking of the length of a sperm, how long is a sperm? If we were to ask that question, how long is a sperm? What would you say?
I can make a guess. Maybe about 5 millimeter.
5 millimeter.
5 to 5 millimeter.
Okay. Yes. That's a valid guess. Yes. Not correct, but it's a valid guess. I would say
16 millimeters.
I think you're close. Yeah, 60 millimeters. Well, I think when you said 5, you were very close, right? Because but not centimeters. You just got the I think your units off. So it's really 50 micrometers or micrometers, as some people say. And back to our definition, what does a micrometer look like? If you take your thumb and your forefinger, press them together, you now pull it apart. When you see that little light now between your thumb and your forefinger, that's a millimeter. Divide that up into 1,000 sections, and each one of those sections is a micrometer. Now, imagine you just take 50 of those and put it together. That's the length of a sperm, 50 micrometers. So these things are really small. Right? They're exceptionally small. And when we think of yes, hello? Hello? All right? I think maybe somebody unwittingly shared there. Yeah, so these things are indeed very, very small. Now, when we're thinking of numbers, and again, nothing wrong. I applaud those two who had the gumption actually to come forward and state their case. That was very good. When we're thinking, usually if I ejaculate, we're talking about 5 ml of semen. How many sperm would you have in a teaspoon? Let's say a teaspoon of semen. How many sperm?
I think it's around like 1,500. I can't remember.
About 500 million, they say. 500 million, I think they say, Miss Sir.
500 million. Yeah, you'll be very close. Yeah, right. So somewhere around it's definitely in the hundreds of millions. So
Wow.
500 millions, that wouldn't be a bad estimate. Usually 250 is a good estimate, right? So imagine 250 million sperm, and all you need is one. Now, is that some good odds in terms of fertilization? Yeah. Imagine 1 out of 500 million, or 250 if you were to use that average. You just need 1 out of 250 million. So the question I would ask is, why does the body produce 250 million sperm? Why doesn't it just make like 3 super sperm? Why does it
So
make
because some just die off while they're
Yeah.
racing to the egg.
Yeah, all kind of things go wrong. So while this process here shown spermatogenesis is shown, yeah, spermatogenesis, you do have sperm which are formed, which kind of special in terms of sometimes the flagella isn't working well. Some of them, the flagella is shortened. So you have misformed sperm. That's one. Some of them, it's a chemoattractant. So it's a trail they follow, right, all the way, to the fallopian tube. And some of them they get lost along the way. Yes, Kieran, go ahead.
That brings me to another question, sir.
Mm-hmm.
If like the woman, females does make from 450 to 500 eggs
In the
monthly,
lifetime.
sir, right?
In the
Yeah, in
lifetime.
a lifetime.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, sir.
And
I
they
would
get
like to
released
know.
one by
I would
one.
like
Yes.
to know.
Mm-hmm.
I would like
Well,
to know
ideally.
why we making more sperm than woman making 400.
Right. So we
450
try to
to
figure that one out. So why do we make 250 million as opposed to the woman just releasing, well, ideally, of course, one egg a month, right? So that's a good question. So why do you think so? Anybody wants to put forward a guess to that? That's a very good question, Kiran. Why is it so?
Well, so like you were saying, some of the sperms are deformed. So we have a population that is deformed. So that make up the general population. In addition to that, I think it's the pH of the vagina does kill some of these sperms.
So even though
And
we
then,
do have Go ahead.
Yeah, and then I think not all the sperm go in the direction of the egg. So some of them end up going in another direction. So we need this amount to ensure that we do fertilize, I say.
Yeah. Correct. So all of that, if you were to use one word to describe everything you say there, what could you boil it down as? Reproduction is a word that begins with I. Reproduction is
Important.
Thank you. There you go. Yeah. It is so important. Imagine that we are willing to do a 1 in 250 million chance because it is so important. Without reproduction, we disappear as a species. So that's why genetically we invest so much into reproduction. We will produce 250 million just for the chance of one of them, for the odds. One. That is really, really good odds. In terms of 1 out of 250 million, to reach the egg and to cause fertilization, leading to the formation of a zygote and ultimately embryo and a complete human being. That is really good odds. And the major reason why, because it is so important. Hence the reason, normal ejaculate 5 milliliters of semen, 250 million sperm. to one egg, as quite rightly pointed out, in a normal, when you look at a normal cycle. All right, so in terms of testosterone, the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland control testosterone synthesis by the testes. The testosterone, it acts at the brain, reproductive organs, and other body tissues, and also feeds back to inhibit its own secretion. So this is showing here gonadotropin releasing hormone. It stimulates luteinizing hormone and FSH secretion, right? So it starts here. LH stimulates testosterone production from the Leydig cells. And of course, the FSH, we'll be looking at this later on, follicular stimulating hormone, stimulates Sertoli cells to produce survival factors, and testosterone and survival factors, they stimulate spermatogenesis and spermiogenesis. Right? So these are the things which occur, induces increased testosterone release, and of course, these lead to the development of male sex characteristics at puberty and stimulates the growth of muscle and other tissues. In the male, it induces the development of male ducts, glands, and other genitalia in the fetus, and it alters brain behavior and anatomy. So we could point to the fact that aggression, is related to testosterone. So therefore, persons who with low testosterone levels, who generally, in terms of when you look at males, they tend to be less aggressive than those with higher levels of testosterone. All right. So how very important, LH acts on the Leydig cells, right? So that's a nice way to remember it. Luteinizing hormone, LH acts on the Leydig cells, and both luteinizing hormone, it begins with L. Both of them have L. So that's how you know luteinizing acts on the Leydig. So when we're looking now, we looked at the male external genitalia with the female external genitalia. Here we are seeing the structures associated with it. The clitoris, which is really an undeveloped penis. In terms of the development of the structures in utero at the level of the embryo, there's a point where both the male and female of humans, in terms of the species, they look identical. But then you have continuation in terms of going down a specific route in terms of male development and therefore development of the penis, as opposed to with females. The structure, which is comparable to the male penis, it becomes shorter. So it just actually shrinks down. And then of course, this is really the, you could say, the remnants of a penis itself. I'm hearing what some persons are saying, so do we have hermaphrodites? Now there are certain persons who are genetically, now it's always important to define in terms of how we define male or females. We define it in terms of chromosome, X, XY, XX, right? So XX female, XY male. Now you do have genetically differentiate persons who are classified as females, right, in terms of XY. But what happens is sometimes the clitoris actually becomes large, and it does look quite large, and it looks like a penis because of the fact that it in the male is the same structure, same tissue that develops fully into a penis. In the medical literature, what it says, within the human species, we do not have hermaphrodites. So in other words, then we don't have the existence of two types of organs, both penis and the female reproductive organs, right? So granted, you do have some instances with females having a very large clitoris, and it does look like a penis itself, but no, it's non-functional in that regard because of the fact in utero, when the fetus is developing, there's a point which is known as differentiation, where you either develop male genitalia or female genitalia, and genetically, you'll be defined as XX or XY. So in terms of in the medical literature, no, there are no hermaphrodites within the human species, but there are instances where the clitoris could become very large and it does look like a penis, so giving persons the misconception as in terms of having both sets of organs. So again, clitoris, and this is showing the different areas, the labia majora and minora, also known as the major and minor lips, the vaginal introitus, right? This is shown here, the entry passageway, and the vestibular gland opening. Note, of course, the proximity to the anus, which is why the region of the vagina is acidic. That is important to remember because of the fact of it, the risk of infection is very easy to occur. So hence the reason in terms of the body compensating for that, it has the area of the vagina is indeed acidic. So question then, so when the sperm reaches the area of the vagina, could they become cooked? As some people will do with ceviche, when with fish, when you squeeze lime on a fish, you'd see then the size of fish, the texture of the fish changes, from pink and it gets white. Actually, the acidity is quote unquote cooking it. So yes, but you do have secretion from the different glands, which actually neutralizes that. So that is important in terms of when we think of the human and the release of sperm, right? One of the things which is done to ensure that we do not have the incidence of the sperm being cooked, literally, and being destroyed by the acidic environment of the vagina. Some of the secretions from the glands, which we looked at just now, they actually, which are incorporated in the semen. Remember, semen is sperm plus the secretion from the glands. That actually neutralizes the area of the vagina such that the sperm could then move ideally to the neck of the fallopian tube where fertilization occurs. All right, so this is another section shown here. This is the sagittal view, and the female internal genitalia, if you would notice, they're sandwiched between structures of both the urinary and the gastrointestinal systems. The vagina, uterus, and the uterine fallopian tubes, they provide a continuous passageway for the sperm, ova, and sometimes a fetus. Now, if I have a question, what is the muscular layer of the uterus known as? So here we're seeing the uterus, and this is the muscular layer. What prefix is usually associated with muscle?
Myo.
Myo, right? So the layer is what?
Myometrium.
There you go. It's the myometrium. Yeah, well done. So it's the myometrium. So this is the level. So this is it right here. But do notice, its location right here. And we look at this in a little more detail shortly. Right, there's the GI tract, and here is the bladder. So it's sandwiched between these two, right, in terms of the uterus. So, all right. So here we're looking again, and we mentioned in terms of the neck of the fallopian tube, the ampulla. So this is where, so you do have release, right? And it is ideally within the neck of the fallopian tube is where fertilization occurs. So the sperm has to move all the way, from the vagina all the way up into and this is where fertilization ideally in the neck of the fallopian tube occurs. Now, could fertilization, of course, you have fertilization here, and then implantation within the uterine wall. Does it always happen that way?
No, sir.
No.
It could also implant somewhere along the tube, I believe.
Yeah, correct.
And it's called an ectopic pregnancy.
Correct, right? So you could have instances where implantation occurs right here, ectopic pregnancies, which is why, it's always good if you are having issue during the pregnancy, it's always good to go to a clinic or to go and have a checkup just to ensure everything is, as they say, kosher, that indeed, you're having a normal pregnancy in terms of implantation in the uterine wall. All right, so now the ovary, this is showing the ovary. And these are the gametes and steroid producing cells. and these are organized in follicles as shown here. Now, this micrograph, which is this one down here, it shows the oocyte within a mature follicle. Now, a follicle found in the cortex or the medulla, right, in terms of the ovary, the follicles, where are they found? Right, so they are found in the cortex, quite good, good. And the ovaries produce the female gametes and the sex steroids. Now, ovulation, which separates the pre-ovulatory phase from the post one, right? This is as shown here in terms of menstruation. This is the pre-ovulatory or the follicular phase, and this is the luteal phase. So usually, persons do have a regular cycle in terms of menstruation, but some persons, they do have a cycle that varies. So in terms of the ovarian cycle, what exactly happens? So it is broken down as shown here. The first thing that happens is oogenesis. And during a female's fetal development, all oogonia differentiate into primary oocytes, which cannot undergo mitosis. So that's the initial thing that happens. They complete meiosis one just before ovulation, and the secondary oocytes, they complete meiosis two only if fertilized. So then they stay at meiosis one in terms of that level, and it's only after fertilization would they continue into meiosis two. Each division results in one gamete and one polar body, and for simplicity, the fate of only one pair of chromosomes is illustrated as shown here. So here, oogonia, so it stays here at meiosis one, and sometime after puberty, right, you do have 36 hours, sorry, before ovulation, formation of this secondary oocyte, and it stays here in meiosis two, and if it is fertilized, right, meiosis two is completed. It's arrested, so it stays at this stage, and it's only when fertilization occurs, meiosis two is then complete. Now, all of the follicles consist of follicular cells surrounding an oocyte, and after oocyte release, that's the egg release, the empty follicle develops or differentiates into the corpus luteum, which degenerates into corpus albicans if the oocyte is not fertilized. So the follicle, what is the major hormone that the follicle secretes? The female estrogen, right? Or
And
estrogen,
progesterone.
right? So that's the major one. But the corpus luteum, as you rightly said, it secretes both progesterone and estrogen. So estrogen, not only in its role, in terms of its role, it also stimulates further estrogen production by the follicle. Which hormone always inhibits LH production in terms of luteinizing hormone production? Is it estrogen?
Progesterone.
Well, you're thinking quite rightly, it is indeed progesterone. All right. So this is as showing in terms of the process. We have gonadotrophin releasing hormone. It stimulates FSH and LHH production, of course, luteinizing hormone. And luteinizing and or follicular stimulating, it stimulates steroidogenesis, so the manufacture of steroids, and causing estrogen formation. All right. And shown here the corpus luteum, so two things can happen. One, formation of the estrogen from the follicle and also from the corpus luteum itself. A small amount of estrogen alone inhibits these hormones themselves, and a large amount stimulates both gonadotrophin releasing and luteinizing hormone production. It's good to look at these things on a graph. So let's have a look and see what exactly is happening. So,
Sir, excuse sir.
Yes, go ahead.
So what it says, sir, I ain't get that one, sir, containing progesterone. So what it that is both, you could repeat yourself concerning that, sir?
Progesterone, sure. So here it is. So progesterone, in terms of small amount of estrogen or the combination of the estrogen and progesterone, it inhibits these hormones. Now, prior to that, the corpus luteum, All right, it secretes both estrogen and progesterone, and the role of progesterone is that it promotes gestation or carrying to term of the fetus. So that is, progesterone is critical in terms of the complete development of the fetus to term. And when we're looking at it, it's always important to look at it in conjunction with what is happening within the uterus itself. So here we are looking at the uterine events. Here we're looking at what's happening in terms of the steroids which are released, and what is happening specifically to the ovarium, the what's happening to the ovary within the ovary itself, and then the hormones, what is happening with the hormones. Now, two major hormones which we need to take note of is luteinizing and FSH. So here it is, we are looking, first of all, we are looking at the uterine wall. Menstruation, of course, you have the shedding of the wall, and then you having it building up. So it's building up because of the fact with expectation of implantation, right? So that is very important to note. And if implantation does not occur, we have a decrease in progesterone, and that leads to the shedding of the lining of the uterine wall. So very important to note in terms of progesterone level. Progesterone levels, if you notice here, they are high when you have maximal readiness of the uterine wall for implantation. When it begins to decrease in terms of progesterone level, that ultimately leads to the shedding of the uterine wall in terms of menstrual flow. All right, so that points to, in terms of the steroid hormones, the importance of progesterone in maintaining, the major thing with progesterone, it maintains the uterine wall, having it ready for implantation. So ideally, if you do have a fertilized ova coming in, it would implant here. Now notice in terms of the readiness that the uterine wall goes through, right? It is crisscrossed with blood vessels, such that when implantation occurs, you could have ultimately the development of the placenta and of course the blood flow to the developing embryo. So that's a major role of progesterone. Implantation, development of the fetus, right, within the uterine wall. Ideally, we did mention ectopic pregnancies, which could exist outside of the uterus, but usually you would have implantation within the uterine wall. Now, the sexual response, which what is this all about? Well, now, as I just mentioned before, even though anatomically males and females are different, but physiologically they are similar. Males may have a refractory period after orgasm, and during this time, erection and ejaculation is neurologically impossible. So you do have the arousal phase where sexual excitement occurs, the plateau, then of course the orgasm. For males, this is when ejaculation would occur, and then the resolution in which you return to pre-arousal state. Now, of course, leading up to orgasm, what you have happening, right? You have an increase in heart rate. Some places you have sweating, right? Because of the fact in terms of the engaging of the penis within the vagina itself, leading to the ejaculation. It does take a lot of muscle contraction in terms of movement. What hormone do you think is also released as it relates into the bloodstream, which causes things such as dilation of the pupils, sweating, increase in heart rate? Which hormone do you think is important or is released during sexual excitation?
Adrenaline.
Adrenaline, there you go, adrenaline, right? So adrenaline is indeed released. So I do remember in physiology when I was back in college, our professor used to tell us that one, you fight, flight in terms of the hormones associated with adrenaline, fight, flight, or another word which could be used relating to sexual encounters, beginning with F, which I cannot say for legal reasons. Right, so those are the three things associated with adrenaline: fight, flight, or having sexual intercourse. Those are the three things in which adrenaline is released So always remember that, and which is why, of course, as we mentioned earlier, persons who do have heart issues, they cannot, or it's not too wise to engage in sexual encounters because of the fact adrenaline is released. And when adrenaline is released, in terms of its actions, dilation of pupils, sweating, increase in heart rate, yeah, if you have heart issues, that could prove to be very deadly. So, moving on now, in terms of away from it, STDs as related to this. These are diseases which are communicated by sexual contact. Some are gonorrhea, of course. The one which was particularly important in terms of its spread during the 80s was, of course, HIV and AIDS. This has relevance for me because this is my area of research. This is where I did my work in HIV and AIDS, looking at NEF, a particular protein, which causes or which assists in terms of the replication of the virus itself. All right, so very important in terms of HIV and AIDS, notwithstanding that, but also to be aware of these sexually transmitted diseases. These are some of the other ones which I just mentioned here. HPV, chlamydia, syphilis, and these are the treatments associated with them, of course. For syphilis, penicillin, which is an antibiotics, chlamydia, antibiotics, and of course HPV. You do have vaccination, and some of us might even see those ads on TV where they speak about that. Okay, so we're going back to the female now and looking at some of the structures, the breast itself. Now, the breasts of pregnant women or nursing women, they are packed with milk-producing glandular tissues. Right? That is important to note, and structurally you could see it here. This is the mammary gland, and you have the lactiferous duct leading from the lobe of the mammary gland, and it goes down to the area of the nipple, where you could then, sucking action could then cause stimulation and the release of milk. Now, this X-ray image over here, it shows contrast material that was injected into the lactiferous duct at the nipple. So it highlights the duct system of the breast. So it just shows you, the so where the milk, in a reverse way, where the milk is produced, this is how it actually is moved down to the nipple itself. Now, if you would note here as well, do we just have one? In terms of looking at the breast, do we have just one? No, we have several of these mammary, the lobes which are present in the breast itself. As you see here, it's shown here, 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 4 of these sinuses leading down to the nipple. Why do you think you have 4? Why not just have one? Let's just say this is shown here, this is a breast. Why not just have one system? Here you have, well, actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why 5 in this case shown here as opposed to 1? It's a word that begins with B. Just like how we have 2 kidneys, 2 lungs. There you go. Yeah, backup in the event something goes wrong. Right? So let's think about it, in terms of nutrition, right? If you're suckling, a recently born child, baby, and if something goes wrong for whatever reason and this duct becomes clogged, well, then no milk. Would that be a problem? Notwithstanding, thinking about it from the perspective, let's say we're on an island, no animals, and the only source of milk then for the child is indeed from the mother's breast. That would be a problem. So again, in terms of the marvelous construction of the body human, it has backup just in case something goes wrong with one.
So let me ask a question, sir.
Go right ahead.
So which part in the area there that the lumps in breast does develop?
That's a very good question. Not within the fat. So it would usually be in you would have in the muscle tissue surrounding the breast itself. That is where you would have development of the tumor, right? And then of course, when it's felt, just by palpating the breast, you could actually detect it. And in fact, many persons, I'm sure, you might know of some persons who have passed, from breast cancer. Yeah, and it's very popular now. My sister passed from breast cancer as well, and possibly this is one of these things, when you're having hysterectomies, it's always a good idea or if ever you should get a hysterectomy, tell them don't remove the ovaries, or at least leaving the connection to the ovary itself if a hysterectomy is done, because if you don't leave it in, you have to be taking these tablets to replace the hormones which are released by the ovaries. And a side effect of that is breast cancer. It's been well documented. And we strongly believe that was the case with my sister, what happened with her, because she did have a hysterectomy. But yes, in terms of breast cancer, it does is a
Okay, so because that is in order, so excuse me, that is in order because they move the ovaries, sir?
Oh no. Oh, you mean in terms of the development? No. It's because of the fact that the tablets that you take, the side effect of the tablet. So when you're thinking of, let's say, estrogen, because it's estrogen replacement, the tablets that you take. But is it just like, do they just take estrogen and put it in the tablet and, just a coat? No, there are other things that they put with the estrogen. So those other things that they put, they have side effects that could actually kill you. As we're well aware, any drug that you take, there are certain instances where the drug will kill you itself, they do have side effects. And with no exception, all drugs have side effects that you take. But in particular, it has been shown then that with women, and you could do research on PubMed, with women who have had hysterectomies in which ovaries have been removed and they've taken estrogen replacement therapy in order to compensate for that loss. It has shown a significant, in terms of the incidence of breast cancer, it is significantly higher than a woman who do not have hysterectomies. So it relates specifically to the drug the drug that is given for the estrogen replacement therapy. Yeah, but you have to look at it, from both sides. Is either you take the drug or you estrogen replacement is indeed important. So you need to have the estrogen replacement since you're not naturally producing it. But then again, the side effect of the drug. Yeah. Does it always occur then? I think this is probably a question you're asking. If you do have a hysterectomy and you're taking estrogen replacement therapy, would you always develop breast cancer? The answer is no. No, that is not always the case. But just that studies have shown, epidemiological studies have shown that the number of persons who are on estrogen replacement therapy, the incidence is significantly higher. All right. Okay, so remember, in terms of estrogen, we're just speaking about that. It does promote pregnancies, and progesterone, it promotes getting pregnant, and progesterone promotes staying pregnant. All right, so we have to concretize in our minds the roles of estrogen and progesterone. We looked at progesterone in terms of facilitating the thickening of the uterine wall, but also it ensures that our blood supply and the wall, the integrity remains there. So progesterone, it promotes staying pregnant after implantation of the zygote or fertilized egg, but estrogen promotes getting pregnant. So this is just showing the difference, or just highlighting the whole process, which we did speak of in terms of fertilization. Let's see if we could just follow it. So the release of the egg, and it is going through the fallopian tube, and in the area of the neck of the fallopian tube, you have fertilization occurring. So fertilization, which is union of the male and female genetic material. So you have the male sperm meeting the ovum, and when the two nuclei now come together, it forms a zygote. In, of course, many religious traditions, I could speak to the Christian tradition, this is where it is believed life actually starts, when you have that fusion of male and female genetic material. This is where when life begins, right, at this point. So the zygote then travels down. While it is going, you have divisions occurring, and ultimately it looks to implant into the thickened uterine wall, which is brought about by the release of progesterone. Once it implants, now is shown here, you have further development. It develops first into the, well, blastomeres, and then it implants, and now you have a blastocyst cavity. And the cells just keep dividing and dividing. When you think about it, how many, if I were to ask this question, how many cells does a human have? How many cells do you think? What would you guess?
So about 30 trillion or billion.
It's on the order, you hit it first, it's on the order of trillions. You hit it first, you actually are quite close, 30 trillion would not be a bad estimate. So when we're thinking, what is a trillion? Remember, 1,000 is 3 zeros, a million is 6 zeros, a billion is 9. So therefore, a trillion is 12 zeros. So imagine now we're talking on the order of 30, right? 30 trillion cells. And when you think about it, this is mind-blowing. Imagine 30 trillion cells coming from 2. Isn't that just mind-blowing?
Thank you for the sound effects.
Oh, you like the sound effect, yes. But it really is, when you think about it, from just 2, right? Sperm and ovum, they unite. And from that, ultimately, it makes, 30 trillion. Completely, it is mind-blowing. And how big these things are, as we mentioned, right? Kiran mentioned at the top of the car, look how small these things are, It is mind-blowing when you think about it. It really is, It really is. It really, really is in terms of their size, right? About 20 to 25 micrometers. These things are so small, you can't even see. And then ultimately, boom, you have a complete human being. Absolutely impressive. So divisions occur. Once you have those 2 fusions, so from 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 16, 32, 64, ... 30 trillion. It keeps dividing, and it just increases. And as it divides, right, they form particular structures. They divide, in a specific way. Now, how do they know? How do they know where to go and how to divide? Well, that's where, which is even more mind-blowing. Written within those cells, on 23 pairs of chromosomes, right? It has all the instructions that actually tell them this. It is absolutely mind-blowing to think that something so small, we mentioned it, right? 20 to 30 micrometer has an instruction, and they begin to divide, and they know where to go. And ultimately, you have organogenesis, you have development of the organs, development of the tissues, development of the brain, development of the nervous system. All of that from just these 2 microscopic cells. Sometimes you must sit and think about that, yes? But it truly is incredible that you have all of that, such that, we can have a complete human being being formed. That is really incredible. So this is us speaking to the germ layers, in particular germ layers that are shown here. So when you have implantation in the uterine wall, the newly implanted blastocyst, it contains both epiblasts and hypoblasts, and some give rise to the 3 primary germ layers, namely the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. So after implantation, here it is, you have these layers being formed, so they keep dividing, and they form particular layers as they divide. The mesoderm, which is in the middle, the endoderm, shown here, and the ectoderm, which is the innermost layer. And ultimately, right, this is just shown here what each of them form. The ectoderm it forms particular tissues relating to the skin and the brain. The mesoderm forms the muscle, heart, kidney, some of the organs, and the endoderm forms the digestive tract. So shown here as well, the blastocyst, it differentiates, or they accumulate into inner cell mass and a trophoblast. The inner cell mass then differentiates into these two, the epiblast and the hypoblast. The epiblast ultimately becomes the endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm, and the endoderm forms the tissues like the lungs, mesoderm, other tissues, such as the heart, and in particular, the ectoderm forms the skin, right? Absolutely incredible. Very important to remember that the embryo develops from a subpopulation and that hypoblasts do not. So the hypoblasts do not contribute to the embryo, any cells to the embryo. But instead the hypoblast, it forms the yolk sac. Remember the yolk sac, it does provide nutrients to the developing embryo, but ultimately once that the nutritive value of the yolk sac is used up, it disappears. So this is just showing some of the structures here. So this is just implantation. So remember, 2, fusion, zygote into the ovum, all right? And then you have, it starts to divide, it keeps dividing. So by the time it implants in this uterine wall behind here, all right, this is usually implantation into the uterine wall. You have these divisions of cell division already occurring. And here's at day 32, this is what it looks like. So you can already see the development here of the spinal cord, and you also see in some venation, veins being developed as well. By day 37, you can also see the development of what is known as the eye and the limb development. You can see there's a hand here. And by day 20, look at that, you can actually see virtually a complete, facial features, the arms and the fingers, they're already developed here. Let's look at it again.
Sir.
Yes.
So they say that since these sperm have a tail, right? They say that after a while the tail does drop, but it has sometimes the a newborn does stay with a tail. So you ever see that, sir? Well,
yeah. So what I think,
sir. Yes, sir. You are going to say something, sir?
Oh, you mean, so what is that here? If you look at this, for instance, embryo, you would notice that, yeah, we have a tail, yeah. But what is happening, this short, the rest of the body, it actually gets larger. This is actually your spinal cord. Now, some person, remember the coccygeal region, the end of your spinal cord, your coccyx. With some persons, it actually, there's a curve. When we look, I don't know if we look at it in this class, or we might look at it in the lab. You have a curve of the coccyx. It usually curves inwards. With some persons, it curves the other way, right? The end of the spinal cord, it curves outward. And it looks, for all intents and purposes, it looks like a little tail in terms of being at the end. So just above then the split of your buttock, right? They have this little hump or a bump, and depending on the persons, it looks, it's projected outward a little bit, and it does look like a tail. So to answer your question, are there instances, and you might see it in your professional career, are there instances where humans actually have tails? And the answer is yes, in that regard. Yeah, so you would probably see it professionally. But that is just a vestige in terms, something left over from the fact that the coccyx, as opposed to being turned inwardly, it's turned the other way. And it does happen sometimes that the coccyx, is turned the other way. So what could they do? Okay, I'll be speculating because that's the word, that is in the realm of orthopedic surgery. Again, I don't know if they could then adjust for it, or they could probably just leave it alone. Maybe it doesn't do anything physically, except just aesthetically, it looks a little weird. But then again, how often, you don't really walk around in the nude all the time, if that is the case, so it just leave. Sometimes when, things not doing anything or doesn't have any interference, you can just leave it alone. But yes, but to answer your question though, yeah, some persons do have it. But that is really the coccyx is actually turned the other way. It does happen. All right, so this is just showing then the placenta and the fetal memories. We mentioned implantation, and this is just showing then once implantation occurs, you then have the formation of really a placenta, very specific region where you could now have exchange of nutrients, because yes, you do have a yolk sac which does provide nutrients to the developing fetus, but eventually the nutrients in the yolk sac is depleted. So that's where the blood supply, you have a dedicated blood supply via the umbilical cord, which leads to further development of the fetus itself. Now, does the fetal blood and the maternal blood, does it ever mix? Let me rephrase that question. Usually, does the fetal blood and maternal blood mix? Could it mix? Are there instances when it could mix?
Yes, I think so.
Yes, okay. And when this would occur? In utero, let me say in utero, when it's in the uterus still, when could it occur? Now,
And the placenta?
yeah, but under what circumstance could it occur? Could you have mixing of the blood? Now you know it's there in your eye, and when I tell you what it is, you'll probably laugh. How could it happen?
So this is just, I guess, birth?
Yeah, okay, yes. Well, during birth, yes, of course, yeah, that is always a reality. You can have any mixing there. So, but when the developing fetus, embryo, well, no, developing fetus is still within the mother's womb.
So I think in umbilical cord. That is
Okay, yeah, but how could the blood come out? It's very simple. You don't overthink it.
When you
Yes.
when you bag burst.
Okay, yeah. So you're thinking about delivery, which is during the delivery process, and that is true. Yeah. But any other way you could think about when the baby is within the womb, it's very simple. Don't overthink it. How could you have the blood mixing?
So diffusion.
Is it diffusion?
Diffusion. Well, I suppose that's it. I wouldn't write out. I never thought about that. And I will have to investigate that further. All right, possibly. But what could happen to the fetus that could cause the blood to mix? Think about it.
So
Yes.
at a certain point in time during the pregnancy, the blood mixes. I'm not 100% sure, but I remember there's some when you're telling us about the Rogram thing and the mothers who O negative had to get the Rogram injection.
And how? Yeah, it does mix. Now I say there are certain instances when it could mix. So how?
And when you're giving birth as well, there's a danger that the blood could mix.
Correct. So that's why is the second child is always a danger, because you have antibodies being produced and kept in the mother. But how does it occur? Let me give you a hint. Stairs.
Injury, like some sort of injury or that.
Yeah, thank you. I know I was overthinking it. That's why you always have to be careful during a pregnancy. If you fall, right? Think about it. Remember, these are blood vessels. They could burst, right? So the placenta, you could have a rupture, a burst. Now remember, they're usually kept apart, right? You don't have the mixing, but if you fall and you have a blunt trauma, it could cause them to burst. And that's how you could have before they actually seal back up in terms of healing, you'll have the blood mixing. So it's usually some type of trauma could actually cause the mixing of the both maternal and, but what you all said before was correct during the delivery process, which is why, quite right, for the second child, as opposed, as mentioned, you could have mixing at that stage. But in utero, you could have it as well. And of course, when a child falls, what else could happen to the child's development? There's something that could happen. Yeah. And so what is that known as? If you have... Pardon?
So the mom could have a stillborn, the baby could die.
Yes, the baby could die. I was thinking about cerebral palsy, you're right. We'd have been going on the guessing game for a long while. But you could have neurological damage, and you could have then cerebral palsy. And cerebral palsy, in terms of the spectrum of it, is so wide. You have some persons who are non-responsive, and you have those who are responsive but have damage, you know, to their gait and so on. So you're quite right. There are so many things that could go wrong, but ultimately, just always be careful during, you know, your pregnancy. And if similarly for the men, during the pregnancy, when the wife send you out, if it's 1 o'clock in the morning and she wake up and she say she want ice cream, what do you say?
Yes.
Yes.
2
You'll
words.
get it.
Yes.
Yes, darling. Yes, darling.
Yes, darling.
That is the only thing you
Go
say.
ahead.
You
I
don't
am
say
going.
like, exactly. If she say, I want pickles and peanut butter, what do you say? Where you say, men? Yes, darling. Right? And you go and you don't say.
Yes, sir, because I when I was pregnant, it had this ice cream place in Crep, and I live volunteer.
Yes. And you're sending the
And
mist
I
that
always
to get
want
it.
that.
Yeah. And all they say is, yes, darling. Don't argue any logic at that point, because I assure you it will not come out very well. You know, just say, you know, go get it now, or something to that effect would happen. And he said, just leave it alone. If it's anything after the child is born, then you have the discussion. You know, you send me for ice cream and you know, in QREP. Why it is it? Yeah, I can have that discussion, but not at the current time. Let's go forward. So, placenta, fetal membranes, very important. And the blood vessels, they are not continuous, as we mentioned, they're separated. And nutrients diffuse across, right? So you have the oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nutrients as well, they diffuse across, but you have no mixing occurring. Breast formation of milk production is prolactin. Let's talk about the pregnancy. So we're almost there. Gestation begins. So gestation begins with fertilization and ends with the birth itself. Normal gestation is 40 weeks and is divided into 3 trimesters. So the embryo develops during the first 8 weeks and the fetus during the remainder. So during the first week, it is referred to as the fetus. Thereafter, it's during the first 8 weeks is the embryo, and thereafter it's known as the fetus. I know what some of you all saying, so the spelling is off. This is the American spelling. The English spelling is FOE. And of course, pregnancy hormones, what happens? Well, one, the hormones increase pigmentation in the face, sometimes referred to as the mask of pregnancy. The cardiovascular system, the blood volume increases, right? Increases 30 to 50%. Remember, you have an increase in mass physically. Heart rate and stroke volume increase to maintain adequate cardiac output. Remember as well, right, you have to keep a certain blood pressure up in terms of getting the nutrients across the placenta. Diaphragm and lungs, tidal volume increases, skin of the abdomen stretches, causing stretch marks. What do you use to get, anybody knows about treatment for stretch marks? What treatment could be used?
There's a cream, sir.
Cocoa butter is one, and there's also
but it's almost 800 for the cream, but it gets the stretch marks away.
Oh,
and the Santi oil.
Who's that? Santi oil?
Asante.
Oh, Asante oil. Gotcha, yeah. So all of those things are very good for the stretch mark. It have a lot to do with genes, eh? We quite have some people, no issues, whereas with some, the stretch marks remain all. So it has a lot to do with genes.
Thank God I didn't get any.
Yeah, genes, good genes, yeah. The pelvis, it relaxing, as the name implies, relaxes all joints. Very important during the delivery process. The bladder, we often hear stories about that one. Pressing on the bladder, they always have to go to the bathroom very often. The esophagus, relaxation of the lower esophageal sphincters resulting sometimes in gastric reflux, right? So because of the relaxation, right, it does cause the reflux to occur, acid reflux. The vertebra, of course, I do not like to laugh, but sometimes when you watch women, closer to them, they have a waddle. They have a particular waddle, a left-right gait that they have, right? And of course, the back, is bent because of the fact that they have this added mass to the front. Intestines, of course, compression, and this could lead to defecation. So during the delivery process, parturition, how is it controlled? Well, you have oxytocin, the major hormone, oxytocin, uterine contraction. And oxytocin is one of those hormones that is under positive control. What does it mean? The more oxytocin is secreted, it increases your contractions and more is still secreted. Usually when you have an increase, there's like a set point that is reached and then you have a decrease in the amount of the hormone that is causing the change. But with oxytocin, nah, man, it just keeps going up and squeeze. That's why your contractions, increase until you get the little bundle of joy out. So one of the things there are, yes, go ahead.
How many hormones it have in a human being?
That's a good question. Yeah. Anybody wants to guess? Approximately how many hormones?
So Google say 50.
50? So Google is saying approximately 50 or over 50 hormones have been identified. So there you go. So in terms of in your body, there are over 50.
But so wouldn't that be relative? Like for instance, persons who have
oh yes,
certain conditions and that kind of thing.
Yes, very, very good. Charles, that's a very good observation. Because even though you have over 50, they wouldn't all be at the same levels at one time. So depending on conditions, quite right, you would have fluctuation in their levels. So you would have specific basal levels associated with them, which is why when you go to, let's say, take a blood test, and they're looking for specific markers or even hormones, you'd always see this column which says, average basal levels or normal levels. And then you'd have your results so that the doctor could make a gauge in terms of stating if it's high or low. But you're quite right in that regard. They're not all at the same level, no. It varies depending on the condition. So for instance, even with oxytocin, oxytocin levels will peak just prior to delivery because of the fact the main role of the oxytocin is really to get that bundle of joy out. That's a very good observation there, Charles. Now, the last thing we're going to look at is fetal circulation. So again, very importantly, male. So we do have the fetal circulation is different to the maternal circulation. And one of the things we see here, this is the blood that is going here, the umbilical vein carrying oxygenated blood. So here the blood, it becomes oxygenated. Oxygen diffuses across the placenta. Yes?
Is this the point at which the blood mixes or no?
No, it doesn't mix. No. So the blood comes to this point. Oxygen diffuses across the placenta and oxygenates the blood.
Oh, but it doesn't. So those little cords that wrap around the umbilical cord, right? The veins, that is from the fetus, not the mother.
So, yeah. So here it is. So the blood is oxygenated and it comes along the umbilical vein. Now, this is very interesting. Here you have, now this is the liver. What is the largest organ in the body? Okay, well, I kind of gave it up there by mass. It's the liver. Yeah, I kind of gave it up there, right? So then, remember this blood is oxygenated, right? Just receive rich in oxygen. Would you want it to run through the liver? Before, now usually, right, what's the function of the liver? When you're taking a meal, right, and is absorbed by the blood, the nutrients, it goes through the liver for detoxification and different, basically to clean it out. And then now it goes into the circulation, the inferior vena cava, then goes to the lungs via the pulmonary vein, returns via the pulmonary artery, and then it goes into the systemic circulation. But very importantly, you don't want it going through the liver because why? Because this oxygen, it will lose oxygen if it goes through the liver. So once again, it's incredible. What your body does, it bypasses the liver. And it has this structure, which is known as the ductus venosus, which allows the blood to bypass the liver. But mark you, when you are born, of course, the ductus venosus, this disappears. So now the blood, your normal circulation could get to the liver. But when you're in utero, there's a structure, the ductus venosus, which causes the blood to bypass the liver. Now, yes, some blood does go into the liver, but the majority of the blood, a significant amount, more than 90%, will pass via the ductus venosus, via this shunt, more than 80%, sorry. And it would bypass the liver. Go ahead, you have a question, Kiran?
So, well, I only was just saying that the liver have a lot of functions. So, well, because I was saying that it's just to break down fat, but it also used as a filter too, sir.
Oh yeah, the liver has a lot of functions, quite so. So when we think of the liver itself, you know, the functions that they carry out, but as it relates to the oxygenation process, right? Because, you know, the liver does produce cholesterol, proteins, biles, excretion, metabolism, enzyme activation, has a number of functions. But if this oxygenated blood was to go in here, by the time it comes through, goes through the liver, right, and it joins back the circulation, it would have lost a significant amount of oxygen. So what would that mean? Yeah, well, that means the blood that would be circulating will be very low in oxygen. And that would be a big problem. So this only happens when in utero, when the fetal development is occurring, oxygenated blood bypasses the liver and it goes directly. And the other thing to remember though, in terms of the liver itself, right? It's very large. So should the blood, as I just mentioned, you know, if it goes in and it has to go all the way through, yeah, a significant amount of oxygen will be lost. So that would be a very big problem for the developer. You don't have oxygen. And going back to our initial thoughts on the importance of oxygen, remember, oxygen is needed to break down any nutrients, particularly sugars. And when you break it down, that's how you get ATP energy. And the energy is for everything, including cell replication, right? That uses ATP. So that's critical in terms of that development. So in this case, right, it bypasses the liver, the majority of the blood.
So
80%.
oxygen used to break down. The oxygen used to break down certain things. The oxygen is used to break down in order to form ATP. So
correct.
Let me ask you a question, sir. Correct me if I'm wrong, sir. But if the liver is used to produce bile, and the gallbladder is like a tank for the bile, sir. So
what happens?
By using a gallbladder, sir, that could cause problems, sir?
Yeah, very good point. So as you quite rightly say, you know, biles are used to emulsify fat. So for persons, let's say, who have gallbladder surgery and the removal of the gallbladder, they actually have to take supplements then, things that will allow them to break down fats, or in their diet, reduce their fat intake, because they would have lost then that ability to break down fats efficiently. And that will come up or manifest itself when they go to the bathroom. Yes, you know, their stools will be particularly shiny and you know, cling on to the sides of the tank, you know, as it's going down, but it'll be shiny. So in other words, then if you don't have the ability to break down fats, it will just be secreted in your fecal matter or in your stools. So they usually would have to take supplements or drugs that have the ability to break down fat, and also adjust their diet in terms of decreasing the amount of lipids that they actually use. Yeah. Again, good question. So bypassing the liver, ductus venosus, it's a duct, right? So it bypasses the liver. The next thing now, it comes into the heart via the inferior vena cava. So there's oxygenated blood, it comes in, right? So it enters the heart via the right atrium, left atrium. Now, are the lungs working? Or Well, let me see.
Well,
Well, yes and no. Yeah, because they are alive. Remember, it's tissue, it's alive. And you do have a minimal amount of output, probably about 9 to 10%, because you would have some diffusion occurring across the membranes. But remember, no air is coming through nasal passages, going down the trachea and so on. So do you want the blood to, in the normal circulation, deoxygenated blood comes to the heart, it goes via the pulmonary vein to the lungs, sorry, the pulmonary artery to the lungs to get oxygenated, and then it returns via the pulmonary vein. But these veins aren't working. So do we need to go to the lungs? No, we don't. It's a waste of time then, because of the fact the lungs, and for all intents and purposes, the output will not change the oxygen content that currently exists. So what does the body do? It bypasses the lungs, right? So there's a hole. The foramen ovale diverts the blood from the right to the left atrium. Remember, the normal circulation is from the right atrium down to the right ventricle, right? And then to the lungs. It returns via the left atrium into the left ventricle and then out of the aorta. So the body, again, incredible engineering. It has a hole in the heart so that when the blood comes in to the right atrium, it goes directly over to the left atrium. So it doesn't go to the lungs. Yes, you would have some blood going down, as shown here, but it's a minimal amount that actually goes down and goes to the quote-unquote lungs. It would go through, right, and then be returned, but the majority goes directly over to the left atrium, because remember, it is getting the oxygen from the mother, from the placenta, right? So it goes through via the foramen ovale directly over to the left atria. All right. And now from there, it actually goes into the pulmonary, it goes through the aorta and it goes out. There's also one more adaptation, because you would have, as you mentioned, you would have, granted you have this foramen ovale, and the blood, the majority of the blood goes from the right atrium to the left atrium, but some would also go down to the ventricle. So it goes down to from the right atrium, the right ventricle, and it's going out via the pulmonary artery, and it's going to the lung itself. There's another adaptation, the ductus arteriosus. So this ductus arteriosus, it diverts the blood from the pulmonary artery to the aorta. So any of the blood that doesn't go through the foramen ovale, it goes through the ductus arteriosus from the pulmonary artery into the aorta. So ultimately what you have to remember is this: when you're looking at the fetal circulation, the blood is oxygenated, right? And it is oxygenated from the oxygen coming from the placenta. You want that to get into the systemic circulation as quickly as possible. So to do that, one, you bypass the liver, because if it goes through the liver, is the biggest organ, it goes through there, you're losing a lot of oxygen. So you bypass it via the ductus venosus, bypass the liver. Next thing is, you don't want it going to the lungs, because the lungs really aren't functioning. Remember, you're in this watery environment, amniotic environment. It's watery. So you want to bypass the lungs. So what do? There's a hole in the heart, the foramen ovale. It goes directly from the right atrium to the left atrium. And the other thing is, for some of the blood that does go down to the right ventricle and is going now, leaving via the pulmonary artery to the lungs, you have another adaptation, the ductus arteriosus, that shunts the blood from the pulmonary artery directly to the aorta. So it goes directly then into the systemic circulation. Again, OMG, what marvelous engineering in terms of these things happening, within the body. Shows the efficiency of the body, and all of these things ultimately lead to the oxygenated blood circulating in the fetus. Isn't that just absolutely incredible? And I hear what you're saying, sir. Does it remain after birth? Do these structures remain? And the answer is no, they don't. Would it be a problem if they remained?
Yes, sir. The body wouldn't function how it's supposed to function.
There you go. That would be a huge problem. But could it? Let me ask this other thing. Could they remain? Now, usually, you know, within hours or a few days, all of these structures disappear. So it seals up. So in other words, right, doctors venosus, yeah, this seals up. So you no longer have the blood going through here. It goes through the liver, right, and then returns by the hepatic portal system then to the inferior vena cava. So this one seals up. The heart seals up the foramen ovale, and this one seals up as well, the ductus arteriosus. So you have the normal circulation occurring. Could you have instances where they don't seal up? And the answer is yes. What do they have to do in a case like that? Let's talk about the foramen ovale, for instance. You might hear sometimes referred to as what? When babies have it, what do they refer to it as?
It's like a hole in your heart.
A hole in the heart, correct.
Yeah, they have surgery done for that.
Yeah, there you go. Surgical intervention, that's the best way to do it in terms of actually sealing it up. Because what you have happening is the blood mixing, oxygen and deoxygenated blood mixing. Right? So therefore, in terms of energy requirements, you're not getting sufficient oxygen circulating. What do we need our oxygen for? To break down sugar, break down food. Right? Why do we break down food? To generate ATP. Why do we need ATP? For everything, anything that, causing movement or contraction in the body needs ATP, energy. So therefore, persons with hole in the heart, yeah, they do have surgical interventions. What's the best place? Yeah, go ahead.
So, and both lungs have air sacs, right?
The alveoli, oh yeah, they have millions of them. Actually, these are the air sacs. Yeah, go ahead. What's your question?
So I want to ask something. Somebody who has sickle cells, and they built up that stone in the gallbladder, So how them stones are formed? So because of the body breaking down?
Now, I'm not too familiar in terms of sickle cell causing gallbladder stone. I'm not saying it's not true. Now, with sickle cell, what is happening is the hemoglobin, normally they have, a nice round shape. They look more like a donut, right? In terms of when you look at it from the side, it's really bilobed. Now, with sickle cell, they've lost their structure. And this is one of the more amazing things, again, in terms of structure and function. Sickle cell anemia is caused by the replacement of just one amino acid, right? In terms of on a sequence, just one. I want to say valine is replaced by leucine, but it's just one. It's a point mutation that actually causes it. Now, this point mutation leads to a change in the shape of the hemoglobin. So it changes from its round shape to a sickle, kind of like, a moon or like a fingernail. Think about if you cut a fingernail, if your fingernail now growing, you just cut it off, right? The tip of the fingernail is more like a C. It looks like a C, right? And this is how it is, right? So then, has that sickle shape, and this sickle shape could now cause it sticks when it's passing through the arteries, the capillaries in particular. It sticks. They stick up, they get clump, and it causes then pain, and it causes poor circulation. So therefore, persons with sickle cell, they run the risk of low oxygen content in terms of oxygen circulating in the body itself. Gallstones, in terms of gallstone formation, that usually has to do with calcium, the formation of calcium deposits in the gallbladder, or sometimes in the duct leading to the gallbladder. But there probably is a correlation, but I just don't know it. That is just outside of my current realm of knowledge. I could look it up and look to remind me next week. But it could be related. One is the digestive system, of course, the other one respiratory, but it could have something to do because they both involve blood. There's a commonality there. So there could be something to do with the oxygen content and the formation of those stones. But that's a good question.
Excuse, sir.
Go ahead.
2 questions, please. One, the worksheet for part 1 of reproductive system. You have to do that as a group or individual?
Right. So, go ahead.
And the second question, well, not question, just what I find on the internet. I could be wrong. They say that the mother's blood doesn't normally mix with the baby's blood during pregnancy unless a procedure such as, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correct, amniocentesis or cryonic villus sampling of vaginal bleeding. But during delivery, you have a good chance that some of the baby's blood cell enter the mother's bloodstream. Because I was wondering, I know persons who have HIV,
and they don't go for vaginal delivery. They go for
unless
C-section.
the stuff really low. What do you call that? Is that the viral load?
Yeah.
So but for the birthing, right? I have seen a few, well, while I was training, I have seen a few HIV mothers make baby via vaginal delivery. But what the nurses do, well, what we do, we, well, you know, Trinidad is a little backward. So we hot
no, I disagree.
microwave.
I disagree, actually. I disagree. We're actually
I know.
quite, yeah, we're quite
we
good.
microwave the water and we fill up like about, we microwave water to get the water warm, and we fill up like 3 baby
If it was
tubs of
backward, you
water.
wouldn't have no microwave, yeah?
Well, true.
You'd have to go outside and cut down a tree and put it on a pan. Go ahead.
Right. So we just warm the water as warm as possible, and as soon as the baby comes out, we just start to beat.
Okay, I can't speak to the that's not my specialty area as well, but I can understand why you're doing that in terms of looking to get rid of it. Not my specialty area, so I can't comment on that in terms of the efficacy of doing that, you know, in terms of washing it off. But yeah, but Mark, when I did mention, ideally, of course, you know, a C-section, but some persons, you know, they opt for doing the vaginal delivery where that is concerned. And again, too, it does, as quite rightly mentioned, it relates to the viral load of the patient as well, you know. So, but if it is, it'll be good to do a follow-up study to see then, you know, persons who have been washed via babies, you know, via vaginal delivery, and the incidence of HIV later in life. You know, it's good to follow them and to look to see if they do develop it or if not. So then that would point to the efficacy of it. I'm sure probably studies have been done on it, and you could look on, do a search on PubMed, just preface the search with PubMed. Type in PubMed, vaginal delivery, efficacy, warm water washing, viral load on babies, you know, and
I can understand what she's saying with the warm water washing, you know, because remember the mother's blood is going to be all over the baby, could get all into the baby's mouth. So they would want to get it off as soon as possible. And then I don't know, I could be wrong, remember?
No, I understand the logic you're saying there, but back to the efficacy, you know, is it doing anything at all? You know, so then you have to ask yourself the question then, is the warm water necessarily sufficient to reduce the incidence of HIV contraction by the baby? You know, that's the bottom line. I'm not saying it, of course, logic would dictate that. And I mean, it makes a perfect sense. But, you know, sometimes logic is not logical. Just like if you're on a street, let's say we drive on the left side of the street. In America, they drive on the right side of the street. So if in America, you know, and if America, well, depending on if you're going down, we drive on the left. Whereas in America, you know, if they're going down, they drive on the right. So if two sets of persons, you know, meet on a street and, you know, the possibility of you getting a head on is, you know, is real. But the thing is, the premise on which it's based is logical. It's a road and both of us are correct. Both of us going down. Right? But here it is now, we meet head to head. So I'm not disputing the logic of it in terms of wanting to remove the blood because the blood is the carrier of the virus itself. But the question you have to ask is the washing with the warm water, is that necessary and sufficient in terms of getting rid of the virus itself? So it might get rid of some, but is it sufficient to get rid of enough such that HIV is not contracted by the newly delivered baby, you know? And that's the question you have to ask, you know? And I'm sure studies have been done on that. So you can have a look-see at it. All right, but I hear what you're saying in terms of doing it. But the reason why I say that as well, probably because I spent some time in the States, you know, and you could open yourself to a lawsuit, you know, from that. And I'm just saying, I just bring it out there, you know, but I understand what you're trying to do in terms of getting it, of removing the blood. Okay. So it'll be good to actually do a little more research on that. But I understand what you're doing, because the blood, you don't want it mixing. I understand that. Okay, let's go forward. So abortion is the second to last thing we speak to, right? Interruption of pregnancies. Over in the States currently, there's this issue with abortion. Anybody has been following it in terms of the Supreme Court?
Yes, they don't want women to be able to, it's Roe versus Wade is the name. Roe. Some big case they had where in the 50s or wherever, they passed a law that a woman is allowed to have an abortion. And I think the state may pay for it in certain parts of the state, but they want to, well, it ain't fully come out yet, but somebody Lego SNA that, look, they want to turn this ruling over and make abortion illegal or something to that sort. So it have a massive demonstrations in a lot of the cities, because they're saying you're taking away people's right and you're opening up the doors to backyard abortions, which is not safe for mother nor fetus if the fetus does live.
Yeah, so it's based on a Supreme Court judgment, quite rightly say. So for those of us into laws are usually based on precedents. In terms of when you say precedent, something that happened before that you could use as a reference then. Right? I'm sure many of us are familiar with precedents when you're younger. You know, let's say if you're accustomed on Sunday eating ice cream, and then a Sunday come now and you're waiting for ice cream, and say no ice cream today, and what do you say? Mommy went last week, and the week before, last week you carry out for ice cream, and we're accustomed getting ice cream.
Yes.
Right, that's a precedent. So you're talking about a precedent. So you're telling your mother, well, yes, based on your judgment that was done before, that yes, I was expecting, there's an expectation of it. So one of the things with laws are based on precedents, and certain precedents are set. When you have certain cases, you could use it as a reference to argue. That's how you see them lawyer with all them books that they have up on the shelf. It's based on cases. So you don't have to go through the whole Rama-Maraz. So there are cases in which the outcome is based on certain situations which you might find similar to your own exist. So therefore, you could just quote that law, on Roe versus Wade, for instance. You don't have to go through the whole issue about what are the specifics of it. Everybody knows then, as quite rightly said just now, that is based on the right of a woman to actually have, or the state to pay for the termination of the pregnancy as it relates to an abortion. And the right of the woman then to decide when to have an abortion, right? Because as I said, with the religious right, they do believe that, life begins at fertilization occurs, zygote formation, right? So right now it's under, the Supreme Court is revisiting Roe versus Wade. So that would then adjust, if possible, the precedents of the rights of a woman to have an abortion, right? And so some states, is not allowed in terms of abortion. And then so, you can ask the question, when could it be deemed as murder, quote unquote, as it relates to the rights of the child? So that is why do keep your ears open on that one. Roe versus Wade, and the judgment is right now before the Supreme Court of the US for review. Now, this is just related to US law. This is not no global war, but this is just relating to the US. But it's good to see, to just keep your eyes open, because it does relate to you. And who knows, in terms of your professional career, you might actually end up in the US, either permanently or otherwise, temporarily. So it's good to know these things. All right. So Roe v. Wade, do have a look at that. So premature and stillbirth, of course, these are some of the things surrounding it. And one of the things with abortions, of course, if the pregnancy does challenge the health of the mother, well then, in the eyes of the law, it is considered legal to terminate the pregnancy in that case. Right? And also in terms of some pregnancies, they do end in spontaneous abortion due to these defects, right? Substance abuse, maternal age, and fetal genetic defects, right? There are some issues surrounding those things. Contraceptions, right? We have male condoms, there are also female condoms as well, and the IUD device. I don't know how they figured it out. I've looked at it, how they figured out that implantation of this in the uterine, you know, prevents pregnancy. It would be interesting to figure. I don't know how they figured it out. I really don't. Right, but they did. This IUDs. With some places. Yes, go ahead.
I saw instances in where that came out.
I was not going to correct.
Yes, it always falling out. I saw it on more than one person talk about it with it coming out.
You will in your professional career, you know, you would see it doesn't work for everyone, right? So you would see in your career, you know, some persons it work perfectly, you know, the IUD device. Some persons, depending on the material they use, they could get infections. So you usually have to work in cohorts with your gynecologist, you know, where that is concerned. And of course, in terms of the contraception, you do have the rhythm method. This is the one prescribed by some religions. Once you do have a regular cycle, coitus interruptus in terms of avoidance during the fertile periods, block sperm travel altogether. You have drugs that actually kill the sperm, lethal to the sperm. You have condoms, vasectomy. Of course, a male could get the tubules tied, and you have both male and female. And for the intravaginal diaphragm, right, this also exists. You could stop the production with the pill progesterone, and then you could prevent implantation, of course, the morning after pill. I don't know if you have anybody here who've worked in pharmacies, in a pharmacy. My understanding is that this is a bestseller. Well, not a bestseller, let me rephrase that.
So it will sell because it's like, some people see it as a fail-safe if you know they made a mistake, and you have to take it within a 72-hour period, and you should not take it more than once for the year because it interrupts your period. The hormones is crazy from taking that, and it's not safe. Some people eating it like chili baby. So
correct. And you hit all the nails on the head there. I was going to get to that and I've spoken to more than one pharmacists about it, and they say some people, as you're right, quote unquote, they eat it like they take it like chili baby. So in other words, and like it's like ever so often they'll see the same person coming in over and over and over.
And well, the name is Testosterone. I know that, but I mean,
yeah. But some persons, they just use it as as quite rightly intimated there, just as a safety precaution. So whenever they do have as the old people would say, when they do have relations, when they do have sexual intercourse, yes, they will just go and take it, but it could have, in terms of the side effects. So just always approach these things from a position of knowledge, in terms of looking at the side effects and so on, okay? And that is where we would stop the class for.
Excuse me, so is the worksheet is to be done as a group. We can do it as a group, right?